Up next on Inside Vintage Racing, putting your toe in the water.
Are you waiting for me?
Welcome to Inside Vintage Racing. I'm Brian Bielanski. Getting ready to start up here, episode number 5 of our happy little podcast here, our vodcast, since we are on video, and this is the YouTube, as the youth laugh at me for saying. Welcome to the show. Today we're talking about how to get involved in vintage racing if you haven't been in racing before. My guest tonight is Denny Austin. Denny is with the Vintage Racers Group. Denny, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Brian. Looking forward to the conversation.
I'm glad you're here with us today. And we start every podcast the exact same way, and that is with the simple question, how did you get involved with this crazy sport that we love?
Well, it goes back quite a ways. I suppose I first got interested when I was a kid. I was probably 10, 12 years old, watching Wide World of Sports and watching the Monaco Grand Prix and Monza and whatnot back in the 60s with Phil Hill and those guys. When I was old enough, I did some autocrossing, and when I was a little bit older still, I went to a driver's school and did okay with that. And then one thing led to another, and a few years later, I became an instructor. And, well, as it turns out, that was 50 years ago now.
Wow.
Had a racing career of one sort or another. I still race with VRG, but mostly I do run our driver development program. It's the school plus some other things that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's talk about your life behind the wheel. And because, no one becomes a chief instructor at a racing organization without being typically a racer themselves. And usually it's not, usually it comes from the ranks of people who have done it for a long time and done some instructing. So let's talk about your background. When did you actually start racing in whatever type of form of racing it was?
I started autocrossing when I was a teenager in mid-late 60s, 66, 67, I think, thereabouts. In 1969, I was old enough to race. I hit that magic number, and I rented a car, an Alfa Romeo Giulia F production, and went to driver school at a place called Marlboro Park Speedway. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but it was a really rough and tumble little track, probably 50 miles from my home here. And I was actually able to convince somebody to rent me their production car. I went to driver's school and succeeded, and went on. A few years later, I was able to leverage my way into a used Formula Ford, and continued on that for a while. And at one point, I sort of presented myself to the chief instructors and said, "Hey, how about it?" And in a moment of weakness, they took me on.
Tell me a little bit about Marlboro. One of the things which I've stumbled upon now in the first several episodes is talk about racing at tracks that aren't around anymore.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We talked about Briar, and we talked about the bridge a couple of episodes ago.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about Marlboro. What was that place like?
It was it was infamously known as the Tobacco Land Circuit in southern Maryland, and it literally wasn't tobacco land down there. They don't do much tobacco work anymore, obviously, for obvious reasons. But it started out, I think it was originally a 0.3 of a mile oval back in the 50s. It was put together. Then a road course was sort of built around it, very tight, 1.7-ish miles with quite a few turns. Wasn't a particularly fast track, but it certainly had a lot of personality. Mm-hmm. We had a race there. It was the Marlboro 12-hour ran for many years and would attract international crowd. Jackie Stewart, Colin Chapman, Jim Clark, Sir Walter, I can't remember his name right now, but it had international turnouts for that. We also had Trans Am back in the early days. Penske with his acid-dipped Camaro, driven by Mark Donahue, was there. The Helmet TX gas turbine car race there.
Sure.
And interestingly, in Kensington, Maryland, a little town not terribly far from here as well, there was a tiny little shop called Internal Combustion Engineering that was a would-be Ferrari dealer, and he would show up with a 250 GTO and a 330p for regional races. It was quite a place.
I bet. I bet. What other tracks did you race on back in those years?
Oh my goodness. Well, let's see. I Nelson
Uh-huh.
Ledges, which has sort of come and gone over the years. Thompson, which went and is now back,
Right.
and I get back up there soon. Virginia International Raceway. Trying to think if I raced anybody else. Oh, Cumberland was up there, and yeah, Cumberland's no longer around. It's come back as something else now, but
Yeah.
Connellsville. Yeah.
Makes me think I have to start at. I always thought the podcast would be just about cars and drivers and all that kind of stuff, but maybe we need to do a couple of episodes here and there on the tracks that of then and now, and like you said, Thompson went away and came back, VAR went away and came back, and it's been an interesting journey for some of these racetracks. So that could be a future episode. So stay tuned for that.
All right.
Which cars have you driven over the years? You said you mentioned a Formula Ford and the Giulia.
Golly. Well, my first car, the first car that I owned was my Lola T200 that I raced for several years. I left the area for several years in the mid '70s, and was working for an outfit called NT Manufacturing, the NTM race cars, well, fiberglass chassis and body cars, D sports racers, C and D sports racers.
Hmm.
So I raced them a couple of times. Um, I bought a Formula Ford kit car, a Zinc, as a kid. It was supposed to be an upgrade car, and that's the car I race today. I was just talking to somebody about it, and it's coming up for 50 years old right now too.
Wow.
Uh, Close to 50 anyway. It was one of the first Z10s that was manufactured. Oh golly, in the '80s, I leveraged my way into a Chevron B34 Formula Atlantic, one of the
Hmm.
Bill Scott team cars, ex-team cars, and uh, ran that here in the SCCA races at Summit Point. And we had a couple of pro races out here at Summit Point as well. Formula Atlantic pro races with standing starts in the whole McGill, and I drove in two of those. Um, oh, my friend of mine had a C Sports. I drove his a couple of times, mostly for testing. About the same time I had my Atlantic car, there was a fellow who worked for Ford Aerospace and was able to get a killer deal on an IMSA Firehawk Mustang,
Yep.
and he brought me in to drive with him on that car. We did. We did Summit Point. We did Watkins Glen 6 hour. Um, Interesting story about that. My dear wife Sarah has always been very supportive of everything involved with the racing. She'd have to be. Couldn't do this otherwise.
Yep.
But when our son was about 6 weeks old, she was sitting in the stands at above our pit at Watkins Glen doing our timing and scoring while we were running in the 6 hour race. So interesting bit of history. Our son grew up in the sport, and he's still racing in it too.
That's cool.
Other cars, I managed to race a Ferrari 250 Testarossa rebody, and I did some work with some Ferrari Challenge guys. I don't know, that's about all I can remember right
Yeah.
now.
That's a long list of fun stuff.
Yeah, they were lots of fun stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So the car you race today is the car you built,
Correct.
and you were the original owner on it, right?
Correct.
That's fairly uncommon that you're racing the car that you built from scratch. I mean, it came from a kit. When it started as a kit, how much of it was it just a bunch of tubes in a box, and you had to weld it together, or did the chassis come and you built up the chassis?
Right. It's the last one owner Zinc Z10 around right now. Well, will ever be, I guess. But no, the kit consisted of a complete frame, unpainted,
Okay.
and all the nuts, bolts, fasteners, and fittings to put it together. The intention was this was back when Formula Ford was going from what we think of the first generation or historic Fords to what we now think of as Club Fords, the second generation cars with inboard brakes, some inboard suspension at one end or the other, and things like that. A little more aerodynamic, a little more modern cars. So the idea was you take your outdated first generation car, buy this kit from Citation Engineering, move the pieces around, get the electronics and the engine and transmission and other bits and pieces, and port them over, and you'd have yourself a brand new, ready to go, contemporary zinc for a fraction of what it would have otherwise cost.
Sure. So what did it take to build that car? Did you have a lot of experience on the mechanical side of things before you took on that project?
Yeah, I had a reasonable. I mean, I was an auto mechanic for a while, quite a while. I guess I still am. I was working at MT Manufacturing, where we built a number of things. We did a lot of fiberglass work, but our real reason for existing was to build and race these C&D sports racer cars that he had designed. So yeah, I was reasonably handy with a wrench.
So it sounds like you did a lot of stuff across a lot of different series. When was your first, or when did you kind of start to spend a lot of time on the vintage side of things?
In the just about 10, 12 years ago. My first opportunity to vintage race was in the late 90s when a fellow I knew from my work with the Ferrari Club. I was chief instructor for the local region of the Ferrari Club, and at one time was the national track event chair for Ferrari Club. Had this really beautiful little car. It was a conversion. At the time, a lot of folks were taking Ferrari GTEs. It was a really nice 2+2,
Mm-hmm.
but they were using them as donor cars to build into replicas of GTOs and Testarosas and the like. And this fellow had a very nice Testarossa conversion, and he invited me to race it with him. So that was my real first experience in vintage racing. And I'd sort of come to the conclusion that, at some point I probably want to keep that in mind as a career extender. And a few years later, a couple of friends of mine who were actively racing a Mustang with Vintage Racer Group, and they said, "Denny, you got to try this. You got to try this. You got to try this." And as it happened, my car had been wrecked. I got caught up in somebody else's accident at VIR, and I was in graduate school at the time. The kids were getting ready to go to high school, and they don't eat a whole lot while they're just sitting quietly in the garage.
Right.
It sat for a little while, but we put the car back together. And when I finished assembling, I said, "I'm going vintage racing. I'm going with the Vintage Racer Group," because there was just such wonderful people, and
Nice.
everything aligned well. And I guess my first race with VRG was it was the Turkey Bowl in 2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was it one of those things where you felt like you were graduating to the elder statesman of motorsports when you decided to go into the vintage racing? Did you go in kicking and screaming?
Certainly didn't go kicking and screaming, but I have to say there was a time in my life when I was saying, well, this is not really racing,
Right.
This is just parades. But the more I learned about it and got involved with it, it's not. It's basically, it takes racing from being a contact sport into a true skill level. It's really very much about the skill and the competition and the camaraderie, and who gets to tell the best stories. It's about bragging rights at the beer party, I guess, is the way I think of it.
Yep. Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about it, and I guess you're the best person to have on this because you teach the sport now. It's a bit of a different mindset because there's the zero tolerance policy for contact, which takes, I guess, and I hate to say it this way, because contact has become all too common now in motorsports. And we can go into a long discussion about why I think that's happened, but I'm guessing you can guess why I think that's happened.
Well, I think everybody, who sort of is not happy about all the contact that goes on has an opinion on that, and and I suspect collectively there's a whole lot of truth in all of it there.
Sure.
It's bad examples and poor rules and poor enforcement of poor rules and probably a dozen other things contribute to it. But if you start from the premise of I just want to, you start from the premise that my car is not going to be any more valuable at the end of the day.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
a friend of mine came up with a great way of putting it. In fact, I use this a term I use in this a phrase I use in the school. He says, "Don't do anything in this session that will prevent you from driving in the next one."
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
And that sort of captures a lot right there. And that's from a very good vintage racer.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. By eliminating the contact, what I was going to say that I didn't want to say was you take almost a tool out of your tool bag. You now you have to outdrive the guy or the person who you're trying to get around.
Yes, you do.
And you can't rely on, a bump and run or, just throwing it in there and hoping for the best on the other side. Those are no longer options in vintage racing, right?
Yeah, send it is not one of the things that we're big on.
Exactly. Yeah. Unless you can send it in the middle of the straightaway and be 25 car lengths ahead by the time you get to the corner. So, cool. So, when you got to the vintage world, how much of an adjustment was it for you? Because I'm sure there are a lot of racers out there who race in other forms of club racing, who at some point may decide to take a shot at doing a little bit of vintage racing. Is it easier for you to train someone who's never done it to drive the way you want them to drive than to remind people who have done it what you can't do when you get here?
Well, it certainly is a mindset change. I mean, it was for me. It was exactly that. I had to realize that my winning wasn't the most important thing out there.
Right.
That what I really needed to do was focus on having a good time with my buddy and not necessarily beating him this time around. And I got it wrong first time out. I ended up spinning and doing some damage and was duly chastised. And
Sure.
I figured, I guess I better learn from this one. And I think I did.
Yeah.
There are a lot of folks that come to us out of the competitive series of one sort or another and feel that, well, this will be the same thing, only a little bit slower.
Mm-hmm.
And no, it's actually, we might actually be quite fast, where our guys are very competitive. And it's not just old guys like me. There's a lot of young guys out there. Some of the fastest, well, not surprisingly, we've got guys in their 30s, even in their early 40s that are, you put them in an SCCA race or NASA race or whatever, potentially even a pro race, and they'd be right in the mix.
Yeah.
But they like the older cars, they like the ambiance, and they like the sportsman like camaraderie that goes on in our sport. My son is a great example of that. He did 10 years in go-karts at the pointy end. World Karting Association, finished very well nationally with it. And I put him in my car and I said, look, kind of dialed him in a little bit. And I was faster than him once.
Yeah.
But not twice. And then he's been at the pointy end ever since. And he, I guess maybe because he was hanging with me or picked up the vibe of VRG, is all about the VRG, cool cars, great friends, safe racing vibe, and is there.
Right.
But sometimes we have to dial them back. We have to, get folks in and say, that move you pulled, that wasn't a good thing, and don't be intimidating the back markers. They paid to be here too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know it's not always the cars aren't necessarily going slow. One of my favorite things, I cover the Long Beach Grand Prix most of the time.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they often have vintage F1 or vintage IndyCar or vintage Formula 5000 or whatever the case may be.
Those are not slow cars.
And they are absolutely not slow cars. They're actually the best cars on the racetrack most weekends. And they bring in some pretty, big names. There's some owner drivers, but a lot of times the owners will bring in a big name driver, either current or from the past, to drive their cars. And while they still aren't planning to go out and crash them, none of those guys want to be last. They all got bragging rights. So
well, you see that at the Goodwood Festival and some of these big festival races where the deep pocketed owner will bring in a named driver, and the purpose is to actually increase the value of the car.
Absolutely. I would.
We don't play at that level here.
No, but it is still vintage racing in the end, and it is fun to be able to go and see those cars, as well as come into one of the local regional series like yours. Very, very cool stuff, and oftentimes the cooler stuff comes from the smaller series. You see some really obscure stuff that you wouldn't find somewhere else. So let's talk about Vintage Racing Group. You guys have some rules, I'm sure, about what you need to do to get into a race car. I'm going to guess that your organization, like most others, if I come with a current racing license, or if I had a racing license at one point, there's a little bit of consideration that comes with that, right?
Yeah, we're part of the Vintage Motorsports Council. You've probably heard of that. It's sort of it's not a sanctioning body per se. It's really a clearinghouse in many ways. It gets us access to insurance and tries to help with best practices of one sort or another. And you can get a VMC license, but more importantly, getting a VMC license is members of the Vintage Motorsports Council tend to recognize one another's licenses.
Right.
That's like 99% true. There's a couple of exceptions, but consider them to be rare exceptions. So, somebody shows up with an SCCA license, they're a member of Vintage Motorsports Council, BMW, Porsche Club. We will recognize one another. I ran an FIA race in Canada on my VRG license. A whole nother story.
Sure.
But yeah, so we recognize them as guests.
Sure.
And if they want to join, they can certainly join, and we transfer them over. You mentioned former, and former is an important word because we want to kind of take a look. We have our driver development program, which is really becoming very integral to who we are and what we're doing and how we're growing our segment of the sport. We also have a driver eligibility group, and I sit on that committee. And one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that if somebody who was, five-time national champion 15 years ago and wants to come race with us, we're really happy to have them. But we kind of want to make sure that they've got some currency in their skills, and make sure they understand, philosophically who we are and what we're doing. So that's important. We'll sort of take a look at that, and usually it's a conversation. Maybe get the guy dialed in and say, we have this advanced class that you could take, get some experience, get yourself checked out, and we'd recommend you do that. And usually people take that sort of thing pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of organizations kind of do that same kind of thing where if you have past experience, you maybe skip one of the portions of the program to get your license back, and you kind of get accelerated through it, and to kind of refresh yourself, or just to give them the idea that you still haven't forgotten how to do everything that you're set out to do. So pretend.
If you remember it, what happens is, and this happened to me, is that I remembered how fast I was.
Yep.
So you got to calibrate that.
Exactly. So let's pretend I'm a guy who's never been in a race car, has no experience whatsoever, but I found this old Porsche or whatever, and I've bought it. I want to go vintage racing. What happens when I come to you and say, "Hey, I'm Brian Bielanski, and I hear you guys have a program. Walk me through what I'm getting myself into."
Um, we'd want to get a little bit of a sense of what you know, what you have done, if anything, before. We get some folks that really are, pure rookies. One of the things we've started highly recommending, to almost to the point of requiring it, is that if you are a true 0 day driver, we would highly recommend that you take an HPDE, a high performance driver education
Sure.
event, and do it in a manual transmission car. Doesn't have to
Yes.
be your race car,
Right.
but it should be something with a manual transmission. And just go out there and understand that we are actually going fast. These aren't parade laps, and there's going to be a lot of zinging and zipping and around going on out there. And want to make sure before you spend a lot of money on an entry fee and a driver
Hmm.
suit and a car and all this other stuff, that you're not going to be making a $10,000 mistake or something like that.
Right.
Oh, this isn't for me. And I've seen it happen, and we
Oh
don't ever
yeah.
want that to happen again. So I want to see if you have some HPDE. If you don't, in fact, I just had this conversation with a fellow that, well, I'm not going to absolutely require it, but you're going to be a whole lot happier if you go out and do a Friday at the track at Summit Point, or a Porsche club, or a BMW club, BMW experience thing in a manual transmission car. You'll hit the ground running.
Yeah.
Um, Assuming we get through that hoop, and you're pretty comfortable that you can handle the speed, or you've done it before, you've done some autocross, or something that is not just driving to the grocery store. We would have you apply for our school. We'd talk to you a little bit. And our program, we only do the one school a year, the one driver development licensing school, and that's in May. And but you would probably be getting some teasers about that in advance, probably starting, towards the end of the calendar year. We'd open up applications. We'd probably have a little chat with you, kind of make sure your car and your preparation and your plans are all kind of make sense. And you'd probably be assigned an instructor very early. You would be assigned an instructor very early in the program. And that instructor's job, and this is, I don't know how other groups do it, but this is how we've started doing it, is that instructor's job is your instructor through the program, and the program starts as soon as we accept your application to go to the school. And you get some pre-work. We have you do a little, they call it a test or quiz. It's not, it's a self-assessment that we have people do that gives us an idea of just what do you know coming into this thing. Do you understand oversteer versus understeer? And if you don't, that's not a problem. None of these are disqualifiers, but it gives us a level set
Hmm.
of where we need to work with you, and how you're different from the next guy in line who's has different life experience for this. So we want to calibrate our training to you around that. Another thing we run to, and this is particularly true with the vintage cars. You got your 1958 MGA that's been in your family for 3 generations, and you want to take it out and race this. Well, that's great. I hope that works. They're wonderful cars, but the driver school is a fairly intense program for a couple of days there, and we want to make sure that you know what you're getting into. One, two, that you've prepared. You've got a crew that can handle it. It's not your grandmother, who loves the car too, or granddad who can't, somebody who can actually work on the car, because you're going to be either in the car on track, or in a classroom, or in some sort of conference with your instructor. If that thing is breaking down a lot,
Right.
you're not going to be happy in the school. So I want to make sure that you've got a competent crew. And oh gee, it's 3 weeks out from the school and the clutch still hasn't arrived. Uh,
You
Gee,
know,
I'm going to have to drop out. We try to make sure that we want this. Your instructor's job is to help you get the resources to get through to school,
sure.
whether it's parts or whatever you need.
So going back to your point about getting a little bit under your belt before you come and spend a lot of money to
Yeah,
go
sure.
do it,
Mm-hmm.
I give that advice all the time.
Mm-hmm.
When someone says to me, "I want to go racing," what car should I buy? What do I need? My advice is always to go out and rent a car the first time for your first event,
Mm-hmm.
especially for a school, because two things, like you said, you have one school in May. And if you don't get enough completed in that school to pass, you got to wait a whole nother year to go back and do it again.
Yeah.
So if you rent for your first school, and I don't know how many rental opportunities are in vintage racing, but I always tell them if you rent the first time, it's someone else's responsibility to make sure as long as you don't wreck the car, it's someone else's responsibility to make sure the car is ready and running for the entirety of the school. So all you have to concentrate on is successfully completing that school. So I think your advice there is spot on when it comes to people new to this.
It works in a couple of ways there. And in our school we're very fortunate. As far as rentals go, we have we are now recognizing Mazda Miatas. We'd actually recognize them for the school anyway, but there's certain versions of the Mazda Miata that car eligibility is decided are suitable for vintage racing. And there are 2 or 3 outlets in our area that arrive and drive Mazda Miata X dollars a day, and away you go. And yes, we'll crew it. And if this one breaks, I'll wheel out another one.
Right.
They're fairly ubiquitous. We have another outfit that is relatively new to us here that bought a bunch of the very early sports racer Renaults.
Yep, sports Renaults. Yep.
They've got a whole fleet of those, and they're trotting those out. And those are nice because we can fit them in a lot of different places. And I think there's some folks that are renting Vs. So from the rental standpoint, that works well. In fact, we've even had situations where a guy shows up with his 58 MG, something horrible happens to that. He runs over and grabs the guy that says the Miata, says, "Do you have any extras?" and we'll finish the school in the Miata. So that kind of works. Then the other thing is there this was not true when I was certainly going to driver's school or racing for many, many years, but there are a lot of shops that will maintain your car for you.
Sure.
So if you're in a position to have your 58 MG handled by one of these professional shops, they'll take care of it, and they'll make sure that everything is working right and that the clutch has arrived on time and is bolted in correctly.
Right.
So whether you have a pro shop or a rental or whatnot, we're trying to find ways to make sure that you can get through this school successfully.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how much goes into a school weekend or a race weekend when you're in charge of everything. I was fortunate that I went through my first school with my dad's car. And dad was there to make sure that sports Renault back in 1988 made it to the end of the school. So as long as you get that portion off your plate, and all I had to do was go to the classes, meet with my instructors when I needed to meet with my instructors, and do my sessions, and I didn't have to worry about anything else. And that's really the key, I think, to success in any driving school. And so I like how that works. So what's intriguing with me in your school is that most schools, you don't meet your instructor until Friday afternoon when you show up at the racetrack. And it sounds like your instructors are holding hands right from as early. If you were to sign up in January, your instructors are holding hands right from January until they get to the school in May.
Pretty much. And while you might not have physically gotten face-to-face, you probably met them at least once on a Zoom meeting.
Sure. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's a big deal with us. We our group leads will typically host student meetings, pre-briefings and whatnot, and not everybody can make them, and it's not like you're going to flunk if you don't make one, but it gets you a chance to do what we're doing and chit-chat a little bit, cover some important points, field questions. If you're worried about that clutch arriving or whatever, piece parts, then there is undoubtedly 15 people at your available to you who know where those parts are hidden away and can get you something if you need it. Again, the object being, we want to do everything we can to make sure that you have every opportunity to successfully complete the course.
I would also, is your school at Summit?
Absolutely, yeah. We've been at Summit Point for, 10, 12 years now, 15 years.
I would also suggest a good idea would be to head out to Summit for a race before the school, so you can learn where pit lane is, so you can learn where the restrooms are, so you can learn where grid and impound is, and that takes one level of things to learn when you get to your first school out of it for you. So It's always good to just have as much.
We don't always have that luxury. There's a lot of we're sort of in the middle of Atlantic, and a lot of our demographics are farther up towards the northeast or down towards the southeast. But to the extent that you come by and you've been to the Jefferson 500 in the past, which is a huge event, or you've taken a Friday at the track, or you've crewed for somebody, the lay of the land at some point. You kind of know what it is you're getting into.
Right. So once the school is it a 3-day school? Is it just a Saturday, Sunday? What's the format?
It's actually it's a midweek school that takes place prior to the Jefferson 500.
Oh, okay.
So we actually get access to the track on Tuesday morning. So I and the instructor cadre, we're there from Tuesday through Sunday because we stay because we're all we race as well. So we do a load in on Tuesday morning and a setup. Students arrive Tuesday afternoon, and one of the things I think that differentiates us a little bit is that we have a dedicated tech crew just for the school. These are guys that know their way around all the cars. They know what fussy old race cars do. They're prepared to help out. They're always hanging around with jumper batteries and wire splicers and things, the sort of magic that you may need to keep that old thing running. So we go through, they get a tech inspection, they get an orientation. That is when, for sure, if they haven't already, they meet their instructor. They get shown around. We get them into a paddock. We've got a special paddock aside at some point for the students, where most of them go. If you're with a pro team, obviously you would stay with them. Then we have a classroom session on Tuesday evening, and it's. I remember when I was doing SCCA schools years and years ago, they tended to be endurance sessions where they'd start at 7 in the evening and they might go to midnight, and every specialty had to have their turn, and they're just on and on and on. We want to be in and out in 2 hours and get you out of the track by 7 in the evening so you can get a good night's rest because you got a busy day on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think nowadays in SCCA, most of the classroom work is done before you even at the racetrack. It's kind of like an online modules that you watch, and then you might just take the test, or if there is a test on Friday or whatever. But a lot of that classroom session has been kind of taken away from the racetrack because it's expensive to rent the racetrack for an extra day to do a classroom session.
Yeah, well, yes. The good news is it's not costing us any extra, at least not yet. maybe they will now. But
shush.
But
you didn't hear that, anybody? It's just
no.
It's just Denny and I talking.
No, we're just having a beer. We are with all our pre-work. We're getting more and more of that done. So really, that Tuesday evening session is an orientation. Have some pizza, have a soda, get to meet Denny, get to shake hands with the instructors, make sure the car is offloaded, you know how to put your helmet on. It's really kind of low key compared to the stuff it used to be years ago.
Right.
Where it gets busy, and if you want to chat about it, is on Wednesday morning, because one of the things, again, I think kind of differentiates us from some other schools is that we focus very heavily on car control and orientation to the track. Summit Point has a convenient layout. Many courses now you can be laid out with different configurations, and Summit Point is one of them. It also has skid pads and a cadre of professional instructors there that teach car control using retired Crown Victoria police cars.
Right.
And if you have not driven a Crown Vic at speed, in anger, or on a wet skid pad, you haven't lived.
Yeah.
But it's everybody gets 2 sessions in the Crown Vics on a wet skid pad, learning the nuances of car control. Here's what an incipient push feels like. Here's what an incipient oversteer feels like. And we want to get them to not panic over those situations. Get good results from that. People say, "Oh, Crown Vics, get that. Who needs that?" You need it, my friend. You need it.
Yes.
And it makes a difference. We also do some braking and handling exercises where you get to learn. You really get to feel as you approach the limit of threshold braking in a controlled environment, not out on the at 130 miles an hour on a track. It's in a controlled environment.
Right.
You get to learn some of the fundamentals of ocular driving, keeping your eyes up and looking farther along. So we have exercise. We spend most of Wednesday morning on that sort of thing. Then we don't really get serious about going quickly until Wednesday afternoon and Thursday morning. So when you ask how long is our school, it's about a 2-day school, but it sort of covers 3 days.
Sure.
At the end of the school, the graduates are then eligible to go and run on the Jefferson 500 or run on the practice day for the Jefferson 500.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that most of the federal government's law enforcement agencies use Summit Point as their high-performance training for all of their agents. And they do their chase training and all of their checkoffs and their refreshers. Almost all of that work is done out at Summit Point. So, yeah, the Crown Vics out there, I got to be a hoot to drive.
If you ever get out here, man, I'll get you into one.
Yeah, that would be a blast. I would love to do that. So much fun. So once we get to Wednesday afternoon, how does Wednesday and then Thursday lay out?
Well, we after we've done our rotations with the control exercises, we'll have lunch in the classroom where we'll do some review, some dialogue, that sort of thing. And then we start sending them out for full track lapping exercises. Sometimes we have to use the entire length of the main straight. We get up to speed. We have some passing exercises that we put in recently that we're starting to make more use of to get people used to literally being side by side in corners, which is one of the things you don't get in HPDE,
right,
for good reason.
Sure.
But now you need to know how to do that and leave room. You can still go through a corner side by side and be fast, and not touch, and that sort of thing. So we work up to that. By Wednesday afternoon, they will have had a full a session of full bore at speed with passing on the track. I usually close out with my warning that you guys have done great. Guys and gals, you've done a good job. You're feeling good. You're making good speed. Just remember one thing: tomorrow morning, you will be cold. The car will be cold, and the track will be cold. But you'll remember how fast you went this afternoon.
Right.
Don't blow it on Thursday morning, please.
Yeah, I
so
mean,
we send them off with that.
It's that's all part of learning how to drive a race car, and realizing that your conditions on the afternoon are going to be different than the conditions in the morning, and heck, the conditions in one session might be different than the conditions the next session, even if it's not abundantly obvious, like it was dry in the morning and it's wet in the afternoon, just because it's not raining, maybe there's no oil down on the racetrack, which wasn't there when you were in the morning session. So to get in that mindset that the track will change and evolve throughout the day is really a great key to show and to learn and try to get some of that knowledge at a school.
Thursday morning, we sort of give them the same talk, and they get a couple of good track sessions on Thursday morning. The first one is, okay, I want you to go out and don't try to go faster. I want you to go smoother. Just practice those techniques that we were emphasizing yesterday, and let the speed come to you. Don't force the speed. We finish up Thursday morning with sort of mock races. Practice starts. SCCA does that all the time. We always did that, and send them out, let them go for a few laps. Probably throw an instructor in the mix just to make life interesting, and move them along. One of the things that I do with my instructors, the lead instructors, the group leads do as well, is we gather up virtually every session and say, okay, who are our problem children? Who are we worried about here? Are there anybody that we're worried about? What's our concern? How can we help remediate that? Because again, our goal is to get everybody to pass the course and be a safe, happy vintage racer. They don't all make it.
Right.
We lose maybe one a year or something like that for whatever reason. Usually they choose to withdraw and they said, this isn't for me, and then it's fine, no harm, no foul. But if there's any way we can get them up, we want to focus our training around the needs of that particular student. and get them through. So if they get through all of that, then we have a nice little lunch, graduation ceremony, uh, certificates, and a lot of clapping a hand and taking of pictures. Uh, One of my dear friends and my mentor, Bob Houston, who's been around longer than me by quite a bit. We have him. He gives a wonderful talk. I think of it as our commencement speech,
Mm.
and he gives continuously one of the most popular things that we have in the event. And he does a nice job of setting the tone for okay, folks, you're going to go out. As Peter Krause said to me one time, said, "You're now going to be released into the general prison population."
So,
yeah. Anyway, yeah.
yeah. So you have this in the days leading up to the Jeff 500. Are the
Right.
students who pass allowed to race in the Jeff 500 that weekend? Because that's
Absolutely.
a pretty
the
big deal
objective.
event.
Yeah, it is a big deal event. It is a big deal event, and your instructor is still with you because Thursday afternoon Thursday is actually a test day for the Jefferson 500,
Okay.
and we include as part of our the fee for the program is if you pass the course, you can go out and practice with the Jefferson 500 people
Okay.
Thursday afternoon, and then the 500 itself is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and if you're up for it, and you haven't worn out that poor MGA, you can go out and play with the big kids.
Right. Right.
But the instructors are still there, and they're kind of switching from instructor coach mode to mentor
Right.
mode, and yeah, it just works. Just works.
Do your instructors kind of stay in that mentor mode for many events after that first one?
They can. They
Not officially, but is that kind of
yeah.
what ends up happening?
Absolutely. We have students coming up to us, all the time, calling us out of whatever. And I mean, the VRG thing is good friends. And
Yeah.
if you're good friends, you're going to be talking all the time and picking up on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it continues.
I have always said that the best programs are the ones where you're not forgotten the moment you're done with your school, because that's, I've seen a lot of people go through a school, maybe do 1 or 2 weekends, have maybe a little bit of success or whatever, and then decide to not come back. And I think with a little more hand-holding, or at least availability of someone to bounce things off of, I think that would be would keep people around a little bit longer.
Well, I'm not sure what all we're doing right, but we're doing something right. I'm very proud of our results. We all are, and because these are expensive programs to run. Not that any of us are getting paid, but you say cost of track, cost of the EV, cost of the ancillary costs are pretty high. So we only take 27 students. And we put a pretty strict cap on that because it seems to work right. We don't overtax anybody. There's plenty of time to do things. Nobody gets burned out. Everybody who's involved, all the instructors still feel like they've got the energy to do the Jefferson 500. But a year or so ago, last year, I was asked to run some numbers just to help understand the return on investment model that we have on our school. And the school per se loses money. I'll just say flat out. If you want to do it,
and most do. Most of the non-professional. Now, I'm not talking about the Skip Barbers or the Brutal Rooses or any of that, but any of the organization-run schools they're typically a loss leader.
They are, and we don't pay our instructors, so these guys are doing it for love. And I think that's another differentiator is we're doing it for love. We want to build our sport, we want to pass it on, and our guys care a lot. But I just ran some numbers in post-COVID, 21, 22, 23, we ran 78 students through the school.
Right.
75 of them graduated. We had 3 withdrew for various reasons. One of them was mechanical. One of them said, this isn't for me, and I don't remember what the other one was about. But out of those 75 graduates in those 3 years, we have 255 entries.
Nice.
So
That's
they're
fantastic.
coming back an average of over 3 times.
Yeah,
Then maybe that's once a year because they only want to do the Jeff,
sure.
or But I mean, we have one guy that came back 10 times, has
Yeah,
done 10 races with us. So this guy's all,
yeah, all in.
yeah. So and again, out of the and just looking at some other numbers, because I was looking at this morning because I have a feeling this question was going to come up. Was out of those 75 graduates, only 9 have not returned.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I always tell people that to do the professional school, the Skip Barber or whatever, but also do one of your organization schools or a club school, because the difference between Skip Barber or any of those, and those are fantastic schools. Don't get me wrong, is the instructors in those schools may never see you again on the racetrack, but your instructors, they're going to race against the people who they help get through to school. And it's in their best interest, because they don't want you wrecking their car out there. It's in their best interest to give you what you need to be successful. I tell that when I'm training a new employee. It's in my best interest for you to be successful, because I don't want to do 3 jobs anymore. It's kind of the same way at a school like yours, is that, your instructors are going to be on the racetrack with these people, and they want to make sure they got what they need.
This is a rule that I've used ever since I was with SCCA, and I won't claim to have come up with it, but the question was, are you willing to go into turn 1 side by side with this guy?
Yep. It's exactly that's the right measuring stick, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And if you've got that concern early on, then how do we remediate it so that by the Thursday afternoon or whatever the last day of the school is, you have that level of confidence. And if you never get to that level of confidence, then you've got a real tough conversation to have with the student. And by the way, it's not your fault, because you've been trying everything to make it happen.
Right.
I used to run some instructors that couldn't bring themselves to point the student because they saw it as a failure of themselves. And no, it's not. It's not. If you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, and your peers are doing, and our guidelines are showing for, and that student isn't getting it, then the classic line of other sports beckon is probably true, and you're not doing anybody any favors by not helping them face that reality.
Right. Yeah, this sport is not for everybody. A lot of people have fun with it, and most can find a way to get, adequate enough to be safe. And that's what we're shooting for. But not everybody gets there, and that's okay, So good. Denny, thank you. This has been a great conversation. I was told that you guys put a good school on, and I wanted to hear it from you guys, how you do it. And I think from what I've heard, and I've been around the sport for a long time, you guys really got it together there.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. You can never be completely satisfied. Every year we make some tweaks and some changes, but we've been sticking to our core principles, and that seems to be standing pretty well.
Any points that we haven't covered that you think we should before I say goodbye?
I feel like I've been talking a lot. No, it's been an honor and a privilege to be an instructor in so many organizations for so many years, and to see it thrive in a way that this one is. And I can't think of anything else I want to say along those lines.
Very good. Very good. Denny, thank you. I appreciate you taking some time with us and being on this week's show. All right, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside Vintage Racing. If you like what you are hearing, subscribe to the Racing Wire Podcast Network so you won't miss any episodes. Also, the Racing Network on YouTube. It would be great if you leave a comment, especially a good one. You can follow us on social media to find out what our next guest is and what our topic is and who our next guest is. You can also leave a question on Twitter. It's at Racing Wire Info. On Instagram, it's at Racing Wire Network. There's a new episode of Inside Vintage Racing every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend. Stay safe and go play with cars.